There's this moment in the new Netflix Death Note movie where L draws a parallel between Light and Icarus, saying,
"You're the one who flew into the sun. I'm just here to make sure you actually burn."
Which isn't quite the right mythological allusion to make while talking about either the film's version of Light or the one from the original manga and anime. Light is arrogant, yes, but you'd be hard-pressed to say that his hubris is his undoing in either version of the story. However, I do think that the allusion fits the movie itself to a T. Death Note is, despite the lashing it's gotten from fans and critics alike, an undeniably ambitious movie. It seeks to please series fans while transforming the manga's original concept of a notebook that kills people into a cautionary romantic coming-of-age story and a metaphor for American interventionism all at the same time. Unfortunately, that time is a scant hour and 40 minutes, and it's not nearly enough to accomplish everything the film sets out to do with its narrative. But still, I would much rather see a film adaptation try and fail than fail to try. I have been one of the most vocal defenders of Death Note ever since the first trailer dropped, because despite its apparent deviations from the source material, its slick cinematography, neon-tinged color palette, and generally bold direction gave me the impression of a film born from passionate creative vision. I kind of think it could be good, rather than a soulless studio calculation. That much should have been obvious from the film's production history. You don't push through a cancellation and multiple studio rejections, insisting on a $50 million budget for an R-rated thriller just to make a quick buck. And now that it's finally streaming to an internet-connected device near you, I can say with confidence that I had the correct impression in that regard. It's clear from every frame, cut, and musical cue in this movie that director Adam Wingard had something to say with this project, and that he was trying his damnedest to say it right. This is not simply an attempt to cash in on brand recognition. The film has significant script problems on a macro level, and over-reliance on coincidence and inconsistent plot logic, but individual scenes and character beats are actually written fairly well, and the filmmaking supporting that script is impeccable. The editing and camera work is interesting and creative, the acting is mostly solid, and the music is fantastic, though very different from what you'd expect from the anime. However, none of that makes this a good adaptation. While the core of Death Note, the philosophical debate about what truly constitutes justice, does remain intact here, it is dumbed down and almost everything around it is mangled beyond recognition. Light Turner is not Light Yagami, his father is certainly not Soichiro Yagami, and many other vital characters like Matsuda are nowhere to be found. L and Mia Sutton, the film's version of Misa, managed to land pretty close to their original personalities, though the changes to Light make them take on very different roles in the story, but only Willem Dafoe's Ryuk feels really accurate to the anime. If you're a fan of the original series and you expect this film to give you the characters and plot you love, you are going to be sorely disappointed. But meeting it on its own terms, it's not really a bad movie. That doesn't mean it's good necessarily. The hasty pacing and jumbled plot really hurt it, and there are points where it gets stupid with a capital R. But if you have an appreciation for the technical aspects of filmmaking, cinematography, editing, sound design, and effects work, you'll find that a lot of things in this film stand out as excellent. And as I found out in my second viewing, the plot of the movie is actually pretty easy to follow once you know where it's going. A lot of seemingly out-of-character moments, particularly for Ryuk, actually make sense if you know what lies everyone is telling, and things that I thought were plot holes the first time through are frequently explained through smaller details and visual storytelling. This is the last point you can get off this ride before we dive into spoilers, by the way. For example, on my first viewing, I thought it was weird that L knew how to use Mia's Death Note page as soon as he found it, but when Mia used it to kill the FBI agent, she had to specify that the agent pictured each other agent on the case in his mind for her plan to work, so she basically left instructions for L to follow, and he saw Light's page burn up in the trash. So that thing that seemed like it didn't make sense actually did. On that note, and this is a bit more obvious, I initially thought it was weird that the normally lazy Ryuk was so active in keeping Light's game going by pushing him to kill and even killing the FBI agents for him, essentially being the villain of the film, but of course it's revealed that Light just assumed that and Mia was responsible and was in fact the true villain. Ryuk was just lying to fuck with him, which is very much in line with how he acts in the anime.
Now I'm rooting for this guy.
Just shut the fuck up.
It's a bit hand-wavy, but that does explain pretty much every minor inconsistency in his character. And without those inconsistencies, I've gotta say, Willem Dafoe's portrayal of Ryuk is basically perfect. Mapping his face to a real 7-foot-tall actor in a costume instead of using pure CGI is a smart choice that gives him a physical presence that he simply didn't have in the Japanese movie. He comes across as intimidating, but he is ultimately the same lazy, bored, sarcastic asshole he was in the anime, albeit serving a slightly different role. The film implies that the Death Note is something that is intended to be used by a human all along rather than a Shinigami by itself, and that Ryuk's job is to ferry the note between keepers, then follow their instructions to cause deaths. The Death Note prop tells a bit of this story by itself, with entries scrawled in many handwriting variations and many different languages at the front of the book. This role as an agent of destiny, essentially, is very different from how Shinigami work in the anime. They only kill to steal the lifespans of humans and keep themselves alive, with Ryuk only tossing his note into the human world to see what will happen because he's bored. But in both versions, the Shinigami still ends up playing the part of a neutral, mildly antagonistic observer, so that doesn't really change much, and I don't think it's a bad change. But the Death Note itself also changes substantially, specifically in terms of how its rules work, and that is, if I had to guess, what's going to piss off anime and manga fans the most.
Oh, is that what we're gonna do with the Note Light? Rules and warnings?
The original was a tight, logically driven thriller, and the only thing that made it work on that level was the rules that limited what Light could and couldn't do with the book. The movie doesn't really work that way, and even lampshades that with complaints about how many damn rules there are from both Light and Ryuk. It is more concerned with telling a story about its characters than it is with making sure that every last plot detail lines up.
Jesus, how many rules does it take?
It does follow the rules sometimes. In his final plan, Light carefully words his instructions so that he never puts his own name in the Death Note, for instance. And because the FBI director in Langley can't physically make it to Seattle to jump off the building, he instead has a heart attack on the stairs. Sometimes the film pays attention to these details, but it's really inconsistent about it. Without these rules, Death Note just becomes an absurd supernatural melodrama, which isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. I think that Death Note as a concept can jump genres without totally destroying itself, but it does weaken the underlying logic of the film to the point that it doesn't really work as a detective story. It might not be as riddled with plot holes as I thought on my first viewing, but it still has quite a few. Perhaps the most important rule in the anime is that the Death Note can't cause collateral damage. It can't shorten the lifespan of anyone whose name isn't in it. But the whole lifespan mechanic is just conveniently left out of the movie's plot altogether, and with it, that limitation, which means that Light could just write Watari shoots the detective known as L in the face, then kills himself and solve the whole movie in one sentence. Of course, he doesn't, because well, there wouldn't be a movie if he did, but it could be explained by him simply not thinking of that option, which would actually not be too much of a stretch for his character. A lot of people are complaining that the movie's version of Light is dumb, which he is, and that is certainly a departure from the anime's brooding sociopathic genius. But the film is at least consistent in characterizing him this way. He doesn't just suddenly become an idiot when the plot needs him to. He's a very different character from Light Yagami, but that doesn't make him a badly written character. More specifically, he's shown repeatedly to be book smart and street stupid. When he gets into a fight with a bigger, stronger bully, his clever solution is to point out that the bully, who's been held back and is thus 18, would probably get in more trouble for assaulting a minor, which is true in theory, but in practice just gets him punched for being such a fucking smartass. And when he gets Mia alone in his room, Light asks if he can kiss her instead of just reading the mood and doing it before she shows him how to do it right, which is a great moment of characterization for the both of them. All this paints a picture of an awkward nerd who's bad with social cues and good with logic, which is consistent with how he acts throughout the film. Light Turner does eventually end up acting like his anime counterpart, concocting a brilliant Machiavellian scheme to save his own ass and erase his problems at the end of the film, but he gets there through a character arc that sees his trust in others and naivete slowly stripped from him piece by piece. When confronted by L, he tries to make a deal with him, only to be shot down. He treats Mia as a partner, only to be betrayed and nearly killed by her when he doesn't take things as far as she wants him to. It takes all of this to change Light Turner into something resembling Light Yagami, and even then he still gives Mia an out if she chooses her love for him over the power of the note, which does kind of break the established rules of the Notebook again.
There's so many fucking rules.
Any human whose name is written in the book is supposed to die, so an if-then statement would only result in Mia having a heart attack if the conditions weren't going to be fulfilled, but if you can put that aside, it's a strong character beat. It shows that he's still trying to be good, even as he makes a contingency plan to kill his girlfriend. Anime Light's self-preservation instincts and ruthlessness are largely foisted off onto Mia, which is pretty consistent with who she is in the anime, actually. She's not as intelligent or forward-thinking as Light is, and her impulsiveness ultimately ruins everything for both of them, which is pretty much exactly how things would have gone down in the anime if Light didn't keep her under his thumb.
Anything, I think you're not crazy enough.
All of this has the effect of making Light substantially more sympathetic in the movie than he is in the anime. He doesn't kill the FBI agents or cops himself. In fact, he takes a hardline stance against it, and this is backed up by how the story is told. The first we see of Light, he suffers a small injustice at the hands of his principal, and then we learn of a much bigger one in how the man who killed his mother got away. We're immediately primed to see where Light Turner is coming from and understand why he kills his first victims.
All I'm trying to say is, you have the chance to stop the type of people who make things hard for everybody. You gotta see the big picture here.
Whereas Light Yagami just starts killing because he's curious to see if he can. A lot of Death Note adaptations try to fix this in one way or another. For instance, the J-drama has Light commit his first murder to save his father from a hostage situation. The film intends for us to relate more to Light Turner's perspective and cheer for him to either get away from using the Death Note or find a way to use it correctly, depending on where our values lie. The discussion of what is just or unjust is the real heart of what makes Death Note Death Note, and as I hope I'm demonstrating, this film does manage to keep that intact, albeit in a simplified form. The question of whether what Light's doing is right at all, and if so, where he should draw the line in carrying out his goals, is central to the film's narrative, and each of the principal characters represents a position on that. Moreover, the film adapts this moral conflict to be more relevant to a Western perspective. Where Light in the anime could be taken as representative of Japan's hardline stance on criminals, Light in the movie represents America's attitude toward the world at large. That is, using its immense military power to police the planet and keep the rest of the world in line with its democratic ideals. This difference in what Kira represents and his country's attitude toward that fundamentally changes his public image. Japanese Kira's worshippers largely support him in secret until toward the end of the series, but American Kira is supported openly by cops and civilians alike pretty much from the very beginning of his killing spree. Light's dad is harassed by his co-workers for trying to stop Kira, and a worshipper even clubs L over the head to save Light in a particularly strong scene from the end of the film. This metaphor is alluded to in some of the film's early kills, the North Korean general and the ISIS leader who blows up his base, and in some of Light's dialogue. When confronted by L in the coffee shop, Light brings up the idea that if he doesn't exercise his power, someone potentially worse could take it instead, which is a frequent justification for America's role in geopolitics. Would you rather see China or Russia be the dominant military superpower in the world? Would you rather it be Vladimir Putin running the reconstruction of the Middle East? Those aren't easy questions to answer. And at the end of the film, Light tells his father,
Thought it was simple at first. I was just gonna kill all the bad guys and the good guys would win, but it wasn't like that.
which is an apt description of pretty much every American military intervention since World War II. Vietnam, the Gulf War, the current invasion of the Middle East, you name it. And while this does speak to the ultimate failure of Light's plans, it doesn't necessarily condemn him for trying. It's up to us whether he's morally in the wrong or whether he simply did the right thing the wrong way, which is a debate that we still have about almost every major war that I just mentioned. This gets really jumbled with the main plot of murderous teen romance and coming of age, but it is still interesting, and again, that does have the benefit of making Light more sympathetic to the audience. In the anime, we either want to see Light be stopped and killed or succeed, with very little middle ground, depending on what we think is just, which means that the anime can't rely on who the audience will root for. It could be either Kira or the detectives trying to stop him. Matsuda fills the role of a neutral party and audience surrogate to give us someone to relate to and someone to question the philosophies of both other parties, but the film doesn't have room for a character like that, which is kind of the biggest problem with everything in this movie, really. It has a genuinely interesting westernized take on the core themes of its source material, strong and well-defined characters, and a lot of material that could make for a great detective story, but none of it is given any room to breathe. Everything I just explained about the military intervention themes is basically all that the movie has time for. The impetus is there to force Light to change and grow, but he doesn't have a lot of time to noticeably and organically develop, so it feels like he changes in big spurts, even if there are a few subtle details that indicate that he's changing more gradually. And while in theory I do like the idea of a Death Note holder being led down a dark path by his dick, and the Genesis parallels that have always been there in the source material are actually strengthened by having Mia as Eve be the one who tempts Light to do evil, that too feels ham-fisted because of how quickly their romance has to develop. L, who has his own interesting arc towards becoming more violent that ends on a very ambiguous note, probably gets the worst of this. I think that Lakeith Stanfield does an incredible job in the role, capturing both L's quirky foibles and his inimitable genius, but because the film moves so quickly and he has to do so much in so little time, his snap deductions end up feeling rash and unjustified to us as an audience. The justification for most of them is there if you look for it, but the film just doesn't have time to properly explain his logic like the anime does. And that aside, there are a few things that just don't add up, like how L is immediately convinced that Kira wants to kill him but can't after his press conference, even though he's never done anything to confirm that Kira would be willing to kill a cop or someone else he sees as a good guy. In the anime, L taunting Kira with Lind L. Taylor doesn't just expose where he lives, it also proves definitively that he's willing to kill anyone in his way. Without that confirmation, L is just working on an unjustified hunch. Fortunately, the movie is aware enough of this to have the police ultimately dismiss L as a loony and run him out of town, but with a longer running time, he would have just seemed smart, and that wouldn't have been necessary. Neither would the contrivances that the film uses to move the plot forward, like having L randomly single out Detective Turner to help him, thus bringing him within a few moves of putting Kira in checkmate by sheer accident, or letting Light simply use Watari to get to L, even though Watari is obviously supposed to be a pseudonym, and that whole plan shouldn't work at all. As I said earlier, this film does put most of the pieces there for the story to mostly make sense on a second viewing, but you really shouldn't have to watch a movie twice and pay careful attention to the cinematography to properly understand it, especially not something that's supposed to be a fun popcorn flick. I'm willing to accept that things needed to play out in an overly convenient manner for the sake of keeping the plot moving forward, but I really wish that I didn't have to forgive bad pacing to enjoy the genuinely great things this film has to offer. Simply put, I think Death Note would have been a lot better off as a 3 or 4 episode Netflix miniseries rather than a feature-length movie. If Light had been given an entire 50-minute episode to get to know Mia, fall in love with her, and start serial killing with her, all while Elle followed their trail in cutaways, I think it would have allowed the audience to get much more invested in both stories. And every second that they can draw out the cat and mouse game between the two of them would add to the logical, methodical feeling that people love the anime for. And if we had more time to see the impact that Kira is having on the world, maybe with a few more kills or some cutaways to the lives of Kira worshippers, that would have given the story room to explore its morally ambiguous themes in more depth. Plus, it would have given us more of the Final Destination-esque Rube Goldberg kills, which are one of the few things that I think basically everyone can agree are an improvement over the original. While Light's ability to induce sudden heart attacks is certainly terrifying and the way he uses it makes a lot of sense, it's vastly more entertaining to watch a waiter pratfall into a guy and accidentally impale him on his fork, or watch a truck crash and have its ladder decapitate someone, than it is to just watch those people fall over. But it's not just the kills and action beats that are entertaining to watch, although the heavy use of practical effects and the fact that the actors do their own stunts most of the time does really enhance the excitement of these moments. The whole film is shot and edited in a very inventive and energetic manner. Adam Wingard clearly isn't the kind of director to be satisfied with simple shot reverse shot conversations and conventional action framing, and it seems like he spent production constantly searching for creative and unique perspectives on whatever is happening. Sometimes this can feel like a bit of overkill. The film's frequent twisting Dutch angles, while they are used appropriately to show an imbalance in the lives of the characters, can be a bit much. But more often than not, the film manages to find angles that really enhance each scene. A great early example of this is Light's first dinner with his father. The awkward silence as the train passes by their house both creates tension and tells us about their family situation. Living next to train tracks means that they're not exactly well off, and the shot of the family photo with the mom in it, juxtaposed against the dinner scene where she's conspicuously missing, tells us that some of this tension is a result of her death. The film does such a great job of conveying this information that I'm almost convinced that the earlier exposition dump by the principal about Light's dead mom was something added at the studio's request. The close shots that frame Light and his father feel uncomfortable, and the camera is zoomed in on them to bring the background forward, making the scene feel claustrophobic when in fact the set is quite large. All of this puts you firmly in Light's shoes, feeling suffocated, like he's trapped at this dinner in particular and in his crappy life in general. We only pull back when he removes himself from the table and decides to use the Death Note, symbolized by picking up the apple, freeing himself in the process. This scene is just one example of the great filmmaking in this movie. I could point to pretty much any moment in the film and talk at length about composition, editing, and the other technical achievements that enhance it. I mean, I could make a whole video simply praising the way that they brought Ryuk to life with a combination of practical costuming and CGI. I'm not gonna do that here, but I hope I've said enough to prove my point, that this film is incredibly well put together on a technical level. Whether you like the style of filmmaking will come down to taste, but you can't deny that this film has style, and that style has a purpose behind it. Death Note, as a film and an adaptation, is rife with problems. Problems that I fully expect will be total deal breakers for most of its potential audience, especially fans of the original anime. But unlike almost every other feature film anime adaptation we've seen so far, it is not just a soulless corporate attempt at cashing in on name brand recognition. It is abundantly clear that something in the core concept of Death Note really spoke to Adam Wingard, and that he wanted to bring his vision for the property to the big screen. Whether or not you think that his vision is valid or that he succeeded is ultimately up to you, but if you come to this movie with an open mind and a willingness to watch it twice maybe, there are some of you who will really enjoy it. I'm torn between giving Death Note a bronze medal or black medal recommendation, because I think that you can learn from its failures and enjoy its successes in almost equal measure. But I do ultimately recommend it. It is an interesting, complicated, and technically impressive film, which is a hell of a lot more than I can say for its anime adaptation contemporaries. Also, take this from a guy who's an expert in credit sequences, it has one of the best ending credits in movie history. I don't know who decided to set the final moments of this film to Air Supply's Power of Love, but they deserve a goddamn raise. And weirdly, that's probably gonna be the most controversial thing that I've said in this entire review.
The Power of Love by Air Supply. This is a Death Note movie, motherfucker! Not The Notebook.
At any rate, I'd love to hear what you guys think of the movie in the comments below. I'm sure a lot of people have already gone down there to tell me how wrong I am without actually bothering to listen to all of my points, so if you've made it this far, let me know by including the secret key phrase chinchilla in your comment. While you're down there, if you like what I do on this channel and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button and go to patreon.com/mothersbasement if you want to support my future video making endeavors like all of the beautiful bastards whose names you're seeing right now. And if you want to see more of my stuff right now, you'll find a playlist of my other Death Note videos right here. Or you can click here to see what I thought of the other 80s tinged Netflix horror thriller, Stranger Things. But if this is the last I see of you today, then I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.